Welcome to Lunch with the Lord. I'm Pastor Mark. We are in Ruth chapter 2, and we're going to be looking at verses 15 and 16 this lesson. But before we begin, Jeremiah 15:16, Thy words were found, and I did eat them, and thy word was unto me the joy and the rejoicing of my heart. Now, as we look at verse 15 and 16, it says, And when she was risen up to glean, Boaz commanded his young men, saying, Let her glean even among the sheaves, and reproach her not. And let fall also some of the handfuls of purpose for her, and leave them, that she may glean them, and rebuke her not. Now, verse 15 begins with that lunchtime is over now. Verse 14 is basically lunchtime, it's over, and now everybody's getting up to go back out to the field to start reaping and gleaning and working out in the field. So it says here, and when she was risen up to glean, Boaz commanded his young men, saying, Let her glean even among the sheaves, and reproach her not. So now when it says here, let her glean even among the sheaves, this is actually what Ruth requested back in verse 7, chapter 2 and verse 7. And it says here in verse 7, And she said, I pray you, let me glean and gather after the reapers. Where? Among the sheaves. Among the sheaves. Let me glean there. So this is what this is what she wanted originally to do anyways. You may say, why is that important? Because gleaners usually there were the reapers. The men were the reapers. They reaped. And then the maidens came along, and they would take what was reaped and put them into sheaves, the stacks of grain or corns, and then what was left in the field was left for the gleaners. So it wasn't that gleaners were automatically able to go to those sheaves and glean from them. No, they were supposed to glean from what was left over in the field after the sheaves were created, after the maidens came and picked up the stalks and put them into sheaves. So, but Ruth asked, can I glean among the sheaves? Not necessarily out in the field, the leftovers in the field, but among the sheaves. So it seems that she was allowed to do it back in verse 7. But now in verse 15, it's different. In verse 15, Boaz has declared it to be. And now she has the authority from Boaz to glean among the sheaves. First, in verse 7, she was asking, can I? She was asking because she had no authority. Now, in verse 15, she has that authority from Boaz to glean among the sheaves. Now, there are times when God hears our prayers and he declares the answer to be as we have spoken it. In John chapter 14, verses 13 and 14, it says, And whatsoever you shall ask in my name, that will I do, that the Father may be glorified in the Son. If you ask anything in my name, I will do it. What? He said here, what? If whatsoever you ask in my name, I will do it. That means he's giving us our request. She wanted to glean among the sheaves. Now Boaz is declaring it to be as she has said. All right. Now in John chapter 15, verse 7, if you abide in me and my words abide in you, you shall ask what you will, and it shall be done unto you. Chapter 16, verses 23 and 24. And in that day you shall ask me nothing. Verily, verily, I say unto you, whatever you shall ask of the Father in my name, he will give it to you. Hitherto have ye asked nothing in my name. Ask, and you shall receive, that your joy may be full. And then in verse 26, at that day you shall ask in my name, and I say not unto you that I will pray the Father for you, for the Father himself loves you, because you have loved me and have believed that I came out from God. In James chapter 4 and verse 2, it says, you have not because you ask not. You don't have because you don't ask. It's like when Jesus like when Jesus went to the blind, right? The blind man came to Jesus, and Jesus said, what do you want me to do for you? Right? And it almost seems like, Jesus, don't you don't you have a clue what he wants? I mean, he's blind and he's coming to you, and he wants something from you. And isn't it obvious, Jesus? Well, sometimes Jesus, he already knows what we're going to ask, but he wants us to say it. He wants us to say it. And so Jesus said to this blind man, what do you want me to do for you? And because he wanted the blind man to speak his prayer, to speak what he wanted. Yes, Jesus already knew, but it was important for the blind man to speak it, okay? Now, in 1 John chapter 3 and verse 22, it says, and whatsoever we ask, we receive of him. Why? Whatsoever we ask, we receive. Why do we receive it? Because there's a condition here. We keep his commandments. We receive it. Why? Because we keep his commandments and do those things that are pleasing in his sight. Now, in chapter 5, 1 John chapter 5, verses 14 and 15, and this is the confidence that we have in him, that if we ask anything according to his will, according what? According to his will. That's important. Again, another condition. If we ask anything, but it has to be according to his will, then what? He hears us. And if we know that he hears us, whatever we ask, we know that we have the petitions that we desired of him. So the conditions are we keep his commandments and do what is pleasing to God according to his will. According to his will. And these are prayer promises that God has given to us. These are, what are they? They're prayer promises that God has given to us. That whatever we ask, God will give it to us as long as it's done according to his will, according to his commandments. And Ruth here, in verse 7, she asks, Can I please glean among the sheaves? Now in verse 15, Boaz is commanding it. I shouldn't say commanding it, but he's giving her permission. Now she has Boaz's authority to glean among the sheaves. And now no one can stop her, okay? In these two verses, Boaz is going beyond all that the law allows for the poor. These verses also reveal that Boaz is taking a special interest in Ruth. He already has inquired about her, and he knows that she, Ruth, is related to Naomi. He seems even now to be seriously considering his part as a redeemer, if he hasn't already made up his mind. But all of this that Boaz is doing for her is because he is beginning to fall in love with her. And as Boaz was related to Ruth, yet still he loved her, so also Christ is related to us by his incarnation, and still he loves us. As Boaz was related to Ruth, so also Christ is related to us by his incarnation. He took on a human body as we have, so he is related to us. And yet he still loves us, and he still cares for us and wants us to be with him throughout all of eternity. So he says here in verse 15, let her glean even among the sheaves, and do not reproach her. Now, verse 16, and it says, and let fall also some of the handfuls of purpose for her, and leave them, that she may glean them, and rebuke her not. For Ruth to glean among the sheaves is a privilege that could only have been given to her by Boaz. Only those who have been declared free to glean among the sheaves can do so. She's been declared by Boaz to do it, and now she has that right and that privilege to glean among the sheaves, not out in the field, not the scraps out in the field that everyone else, all the other gleaners have to. Now she can glean among the sheaves. Jesus Christ has declared all believers to glean from the precious truths of God's word. But beyond this, listen, but beyond this, not in verse 15, she was given authority to glean among the sheaves. But in verse 16, listen, in verse 16, this goes beyond the sheaves. Listen, but beyond this, there are special blessings, special portions of God's grace, which he drops in our path. The next step I take, he said, what did he say in verse 16? And let not only let her glean among the sheaves, but listen, reapers and maidens. Verse 16, let also some of the handfuls of purpose, let them fall for her. What's handfuls of purpose? Oh, it's like you're just all of a sudden, somehow it just drops out of a nice big piece of corn. It just drops out of your hand, right? It just drops right there next to the sheaves, right? You know what I'm getting at, right? You know, just some of the, if you get a nice big fruit there, just somehow, just look the other way. Let it drop. Let it drop. If Ruth is near, let it drop by. Give her some of the handfuls of purpose. The next step I take, there's a handful of grace. 3 steps later, there's a handful of answered prayer. 5 steps after that, there's a handful of wisdom. Wisdom of how to deal with your children. And a few steps after that, there's a handful of healing for a relative. These handfuls are above and beyond. They're above and beyond the sheaves. The blessings have been put before us. We just have to pick them up. Don't pass by the special blessings. Yes, it's a privilege to glean among the sheaves, but God put special blessings for us. Don't pass by the special blessings that God has put in your path. Keep praying, keep studying, keep meditating, keep loving the brethren. And these extra handfuls of grace and blessings will all of a sudden they'll appear. All of a sudden you'll feel this drop of grace just come into your heart. A little farther longer, another day or two longer, a trouble comes up, and you'll get a drop. God will drop another handful of peace and patience in your heart. He'll just let it drop. God will drop a handful of mercy and contentment in your heart. You're feeling discontented. You're feeling a little envious and jealous of other people. God will drop a little handful of contentment and contentment and peace in your heart. Listen, these are the handfuls of purpose that God purposely lays before us that we need in our life. They're extra blessings. They're the above and beyond the sheaves blessings. Until next lesson, God bless you. And I know, listen, walk with him. I know he walks with you.